First Nation and Native American Reservation Sightings, Part 5. Anecdotal Evidence. There exists a notion by skeptics that anecdotal references in the manner of stories and individual testimonies are unacceptable in Bigfoot research. Stories such as the ones in this book are considered subjective, unreliable, and sometimes prejudiced information. But report reliability depends solely on the interpretive skills of the examiner. Short of requiring affidavits and polygraph testing of all informants, truth in any statement is difficult to determine even by the best in the field. There exists no individual in this research who hasn't been duped by a Bigfoot sighting informant without exception. We've all been fooled at one time or another. Some will admit it, others won't. The kicker is, without the testimonies, without the acknowledgement and acceptance of anecdotal evidence, general research has nothing that reveals Sasquatch behavior. Without the stories, without the testimony, there would be no research. There would be no clues, no statistical data to draw from. DNA may tell us their genome, their ancestry, and genetic lineage, but it won't tell us anything about their culture, their traditions, or what they consider acceptable behavior. I often wonder how they view us. What are we to them? Will we ever know? Along that line of thought, there is nothing as helpful to research, in my opinion, as the Native American and First Nations oral history. Without Aboriginal opinion, their folklore, legends, and their remembrances of the past, there is no trace history to pull from, and it is with that in mind that the documentations I have included here may be helpful to future generations long after I'm gone. DNA may decipher what the Sasquatch people are to some extent, but DNA will never tell us how they live, how they manage to survive alongside civilized man. DNA won't examine why they live like they do, and it won't tell us anything about their language, if it exists. And I believe that language does exist on some rudimentary level. All we have to draw from are clues from the shared data, which is why witness declarations must be considered. At the very least, anecdotal evidence is a point at which to begin sorting through ape versus human clues, the conventional versus creepy supernatural theories. Mainland Halkomelem, Upper Stelo. The Halkomelem-speaking people of the lower Fraser Valley in British Columbia, Canada, sometimes call themselves collectively Stelo, river people. Author Wilson Duff used the term Upper Stelo for the people from Chilliwack upstream with whom he worked in 1949 and 1950. He gives informants descriptions and accounts as like two man-like creatures. Duff recorded the Sasquatch native term as Shashhacha and the cannibal woman terminology as Uhaila. Cite Wilson Duff, The Upper Stelo Indians of the Fraser Valley, British Columbia, 1952. Sasquatches, Duff reports, are usually seen singly. They are described as men, covered with dark hair, more than 8 feet tall, who leave footprints about 20 inches long. Duff cites 2 experiences with the Sasquatch. The stolen woman learned the language. In the first account, a typical older account given by Adeline Lorenzetto of Ohamil Indian Reservation in British Columbia said the Sasquatches caused a person it touched to become unconscious, so great was her fear. They stole women and kept them as wives, producing many half-Indian, half-Sasquatch children. Some were haired, some not. They stole food from people for their women and their children. They have a language which the stolen woman learned. When a woman escaped and re-entered human society, she became unconscious again because she had been with the Sasquatches and wasn't like a person anymore. The captive wife woman forgot her native language and her hair began to grow all over her body, but Indian doctors worked on her and she became normal again. Many years later, the Sasquatches returned, but she could no longer communicate with them. The woman asked hunters not to shoot them because they might be her relatives. Wilson Duff, 1952. In the second account cited by Duff, a Sasquatch murdered a group of women from the Ohamil Indian Reserve but left their children unhurt. In recent accounts, Duff said a person who usually sees the Sasquatch on a moonlit night should run from the Sasquatch. He will be followed but not overtaken. In another case given, the man escaped by shooting the Sasquatch dead. Interesting, the Kwakiutl Indians in British Columbia also believed that there were giants in the forest that ate Indian women who strayed too far into the forest. No wonder the hair giants were greatly feared. In another account, which is a brief version of the famous Ruby Creek incident, the Sasquatch breaks into a house to steal dried fish. S.C. Tifting described what he and police officer Joe Dunn discovered about the 1941 Ruby Creek incident. The Sasquatch had merely stepped over a 4-foot-high Canadian Pacific Railroad fence and continued on over the railroad and into the mountain on the other side. Jeannie Chapman and her children were terrified when the daughter, little Rosie, reported that a big cow was coming out of the forest. Mrs. Chapman saw the Sasquatch herself. It was an 8 to 10 foot tall, hairy creature with a human face. The Sasquatch broke into a heavy barrel of smoked salmon and threw some about. When Dunn and Tifting arrived, they were able to follow the tracks of the Sasquatch from the cabin to the creek where it must have washed off some of the salt from its mouth. It then went back through the garden, crossed the Canadian Pacific Railroad fence by easily stepping over it. It then went across the railroad tracks and straight up the mountain, where, of course, Tifting and Dunn could no longer follow. This thing must have been huge. Dunn was flabbergasted by its footprint. It was narrow at the heel and wide at the toes. He traced it, certain that it showed 5 toes. S.C. Tifting would say 5 toes as well. Stealing fish is mentioned in a number of accounts by coastal Indians ranging from Alaska to California. The cannibal woman, Uhaya, was described as a short, stout woman who caught children, gummed their eyes shut with tree pitch, carried them off in a basket, cooked and ate them. She lived in a cave above Yale, British Columbia, which was blasted away when the railroad was built and the white people may have captured her. At any rate, a picture appeared in the paper that looked like her, Uhaya. Wilson Duff, cite Wilson Duff, The Upper Stelo Indians of the Fraser Valley, British Columbia, 1952. The Tenina, the Aina, and the Ingalik. To the Tenina Indians in the vicinity to the north and south of Wasilla, Alaska, the raven is a type of creator god not only to them, but to include other Alaskan Athabascans. The raven is revered and a benevolent figure that helps shape their world. At the same time, the raven is a trickster character in many Tenina stories that tell of the trouble the raven can get into. The term Kahadashadi, however, describes in their original language a male violent entity that is hair-covered, tall, and hides in the bush where it makes strange sounds. The Kahadashadi is the watcher. Nia, Running Dog, 1996. To be continued, and thank you for listening. There would be many parts to the reading of this book. If you like this reading, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to be sure to catch the future parts. We welcome comments, but please be considerate of others. If you have had an experience with or about Bigfoot, cryptids, UFOs, paranormal, or any other strange happenings, and would like to share them on our channel to be read, please email them to sharingofstrangestories@gmail.com. We hope to establish a channel that can provide an outlet for people to speak freely of their experiences without ridicule from others. There are many of us out there that have had these experiences and have faced the ridicule. Emails will be read on our channel, so please keep them family-friendly. If you want to remain anonymous and do not want your name read to the public, please put that at the beginning of the email or in the subject line. Thanks again for listening and stay safe.